Yeah, gross margin, when I think about that, it's the cost of what's associated with the piece of revenue. And I'll say this more simply. Of say you have a book. There's a cost for printing that book. There's a cost for shipping the book. That cost, that direct cost, should be tied directly to a dollar of revenue.
Welcome to the Value Factory Podcast, brought to you by One Accord. We're all about helping businesses thrive and grow through leadership, strategy, and meaningful impact. Now, whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out, our goal is to provide insights and inspiration to help you navigate your journey. Thanks for tuning in.
Talking about one of my favorite conversations. I like to say it this way, there's a lot of margins in business. Some of them are gross, but the best ones are net. I guess if they're positive, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You know a thing or two about that. Running Bison CFO, you work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses and focus on margin.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, what we deal with a lot is business owners don't get into business to deal with the numbers. They get into business to do what they love, do what they enjoy. And so then you start talking about gross and net margins and one-time expenses and all this stuff, and they don't have any clue. And so a lot of it is like, once you educate on it, people really see the power in it.
Yeah.
And again, they still don't want it to be their job. But when even if it's not their forte, when you start understanding how little changes and levers can impact their take home or impact what they're able to do in the business, you can take people that are non-financial people and really turn them into people that are passionate about it. And that's what we love to do, be educators and coaches in that.
One of the early questions that I ask of particularly small businesses. So let's say sub 5 million in revenue. That's where I would classify like small businesses. What's your cost of goods sold? What's your gross margin? And, I get all kinds of answers that are close to the GAAP, right? The generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, like, that you've been in finance and you've been doing CFO work for a long time, but to ask the person that is, the entrepreneur, that is marketing, that is sales, that is HR, that is operations, that is delivery, to also be an accountant, right?
Yeah.
But when we get into the conversation, and as you say, as an educator, and you've been doing this for a long time just with your newsletter, right? I mean, you've got, how many people are subscribing to your newsletter?
Yeah, I have 35 to 40,000 in my newsletter. I started that back in 2022. And the whole goal is to educate both business owners and leaders in those regions about, like, you don't need to be intimidated because you don't understand. I think that's where people get embarrassed that they don't, and they think they should. And it's just that's where we all start,
And it's overwhelming sometimes too. Like,
yeah,
I'm in a season right now, just, I like to be really transparent, open about how life goes as an entrepreneur, where there are a lot of priorities competing for my attention, which is a really gentle way for me to say that I'm like, I haven't shaved in a couple of days, grinding. And literally all I want is like 4 hours of sensory deprivation. I want to go into one of those salt float tanks and like just not think, right? And so if it's time to do accounting and it's, month end, and, here we are 2 weeks past the end of September, and I want to be looking at third quarter financial statements, and I want to understand how did we do? It's overwhelming, like, to even start thinking about it.
Yeah.
Then I start thinking about, the state tax remittance and the October 15th filing deadline that was yesterday. And like, did we get everything in? And like, all these thoughts come in, but let's just answer some questions, provide some of that education in this conversation. You wrote a blog that we've hosted, Why Profit Disappears as You Scale. So disappearing profit, like where'd that idea come from? What made you want to write about that?
Yeah. So I hear exactly what you're saying all the time, in the fact that, people get overwhelmed the second they look at, their financials. And the reason they get overwhelmed is because they don't understand, they don't know where to go. And what I find is that most of the time when we come in, we're talking to really smart people that have grown businesses, done really impressive stuff. But when it comes to the financial stuff, frankly, you're in it for so long, you sometimes are blind to these things, or you don't know what the best thing is. And so when we start working with someone, the first two things we look at are cash and profit, right? Because
Mm.
ultimately, cash, what comes into your pocket, is really what the business owner feels the most, right? But cash is a product of the profits that you're generating. So some of the first levers that we pull are often very similar. And we see a lot of the same issues across businesses. And it's all stuff that it's not, again, not people being stupid. It's
Right.
just the natural ebb and flow of business is you start one place, gradually small things change, and next thing you look back in your business that was originally 20-25% profit margins is below 10%, and you have no idea what happens. This is something that's near and dear to our heart because we can come in very short order, say these are the 2 or 3 things we're doing. A lot of these are, we're going to increase prices. A lot of them are, we're going to make some small change. That's a one-time decision that's going to impact stuff down the line. And so that's why I get really passionate about it, is because you can get really quick wins for people
Well, and you
focused on
identified
things.
you identified 5 like key
Yeah.
areas, and you just mentioned raising prices. But let me just dial it back, because you talked about a profit margin of 25% shrinking down to 10.
Yeah.
And I'm presuming you're talking about net profit. So this is the
Yes. Yeah.
net profit of the company, which doesn't always mean cash. So I'm
Yeah.
backing it up because you said you look at profit and you look at cash. So how is it that profit doesn't equal cash?
Yeah. That's the age old thing that no business owner can understand. A real simple way to think about this is you have two sets of financial statements. We're not going to go into the details there. You have, a cash basis and you have an accrual basis. And a accrual basis is really just matching up revenue and expenses so that a business owner can know their true profitability.
Mm-hmm.
A cash basis is just looking at cash in and cash out. So where you see a big mismatch of cash, one of the key areas, and I'm just trying to use this as like a starting point example because I think it's helpful, of if you grow really quickly and you invoice that. And so say you had $1 million of revenue one month and you had 5 the next, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to show huge profitability in that month with 5 million in revenue. But if you have a 30-day term for your customer, you likely won't receive that money till the next month, right? And so at the end of that month with 5 million in revenue, you may still only show, say, 400,000 in cash.
Yeah.
But then 30 days later, once you receive that 5 million, you could show a couple million in cash. And that's really the primary difference between profit and cash. There's other differences, but that's like the primary thing, is just the movement of cash in the business. Nothing ever lines up. So there's
Right.
always this mismatch and these things moving back and forth. And so a lot of that is managing some of those mismatches and in some ways trying to manipulate those mismatches to get the most cash and most profit possible.
And there's an intuition that I think at a small scale. So somebody in startup mode, they're at 500,000, $1 million in sales. I think the owner operator in that situation has an intuition around, okay, I made a sale. I know when my customer is going to pay me.
Yeah.
I know when the check's going to clear. I know when my bills are due. So there's an intuition to some level around cash flows that then kind of back feeds into profitability. Like if I've got money in the bank, then I'm doing okay. I kind of manage my business based on the bank statement. We get into that 5 million in sales and probably 2.5 million, 3, but 5, depending on the complexity, right? And that just becomes impossible. No person can effectively manage the financial side of a business on intuition and looking at bank statements, unless you have 3 customers and each of them pay you, one and a
Right.
quarter million, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like that. But if you've got 30, 40, 60, 100 customers, varying projects, different cycles, cash in and out. But that company at 2.5, 3 million, they don't need to hire a full-time CFO. They can't afford to hire a full-time CFO, which is where your fractional CFO work
Yeah.
comes in. But really that company probably needs some data entry and some bookkeeping. Number one, just to ensure those financial statements reflect the accurate activity
Yeah.
in and out, right?
And what we often see is like you mentioned the bank statement, people manage off the bank account
Yeah.
because they don't understand what's in the financials. And then they often don't have good data entry and systems. So then
Right.
they know they can't trust it either. So they then are just completely, completely blind to
Yeah.
this. I had a conversation with the business owner that they were a smaller business. They were making significant amount of profit for that business, felt like they were doing pretty well. And then it came time to pay for a tax payment.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the money to pay it, but it was just going to decimate his cash account.
Yep.
And it's like, well, what happened? Well, what happened is he shipped stuff from China and it takes 3 months to get it across the ocean, and then he sells it. And next thing you know, it takes over 200 days from his initial cash outlay to getting that money in.
Mm.
So it's like you can show a profit, right? Because we're showing the sales and we're showing this, but it's a painful process. And when you're managing with the bank, that works. And the way I say that works until it doesn't.
Yep.
And then that doesn't is a panic, right? Because then
Yeah.
you're trying to figure it out. And that's why we're really big on financial education, is because it can help us get to where we're not reacting. We're being more proactive.
So when we get into a more complex financial situation, and that's where I'm using some numbers, revenue numbers, kind of 5 million. There's not, from my observation, and this is 25 years in banking, finance, business, looking at financial statements. There's not by orders of magnitude like an exponential increase in the difficulty of financial statements between, let's say, 5 million and 50 million. Like,
Yeah.
a $50 million business is going to have more complex financial statements, but it's not as though it's 10x more complex. Whereas from a $500,000 to 5 million really is a 10x kind of, like, that's a big, huge jump. At 5 million, 15, 30, 50, 70, there's just more data there.
Yeah.
But sometimes with more data, it makes it easier. So we think about, one of those levers to pull is like pricing. If I've got one product and 7 customers, I probably don't feel very secure about playing around with pricing, because if I increase price too much and I lose one of 7 customers, that concentration issue is a real risk. But if I'm a $50 million company and I've got 19 products and hundreds of thousands of customers, then I can play with pricing, and I've got a whole lot more data to track and, kind of understand what's going on. But I think you observe, at least as you wrote in your blog, that pricing is probably number one, like the number one place to recover those diminishing profits.
Yeah, like I've never talked to a business owner, and again, these are not big businesses, like in the sense of they've got executive teams. They're generally small to medium businesses. I've yet to talk to one that has a cohesive strategy for raising or adjusting prices, right? And the issue with that is what happens is you just kind of do it when you start feeling the pain, right? And that means that, let's just say you do it every 2 years. Well, no one wants or likes a 10 or 15% increase, right? They're going to balk or they're going to be upset. And so in your fear of raising prices, what you're doing is you're forcing yourself, you're not raising them, and then you're forcing yourself to those harder price increases. But then you don't want to make them because of the fear. So then you still just do the smaller price increase. And
so if I hear you in that, instead of going 10% once every 2 or 3 years, go 3% or 5% every year.
Yes.
But the person who delays because they don't want to increase price every year should be jumping 10% because it's been 2 or 3 years, but they can't sell that. So then they only go 3%, and that's where the margins shrink because all the other costs are going up.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about this, of like, I've not experienced it. Maybe you have. Has anyone ever come to you and just randomly through the year and said, "And I appreciate you keeping your price the same for this long"?
No,
right? No, they don't think about it.
Never heard that.
You've never heard that. And so, what is key is just the thing is if you train people that it's going to happen, they just expect it. It's when people are surprised that it's an issue, and they only get surprised because you've not raised prices over a period of time. And I'll be honest, like I don't do a good job of this with our clients. I don't have a pricing strategy. We're still, just been a business for for going on 3 years now.
Yeah.
And so it's like we don't have a way to do that at this point. And so we have some pricing that we need to raise with people.
Who do you
And
see that does
it's
this
hard and
really well?
intimidating. What?
Who do you see that does this really well? Manage price increase.
Yeah, I don't. Who does it well? I will say there's one guy who ran an engineering firm. I don't know if I'd call it running it well, but he every single year and this is people overcomplicate it. He looked at his cost and he kind of with just a wave of a wand said, we're going to raise it this much. And what he did is once he raised it, he literally sent out a notice that said, hey, because of these cost increases, we're raising prices. Here's your new price sheet, right? It's simple. It's not hard. It's not there. And I saw him do this for 4 years, and there was not once did we get anyone that actively pushed back on that price increase. We had, you obviously don't know if there's people that left, at different periods of time. But what I've often found that people that leave because of a small, kind of step up price increase are the people that are often the ones that are already causing the most issues, right? They're already pushing the most, right? And so what I think people lose sight of, and obviously it's hard when you're in one of these smaller businesses, is when you increase prices, the people that are happy with you are generally going to be thrilled to pay that. The people that are upset are the people that are probably already on the fringes, and they're likely your more difficult customers to deal with. And so that's something that I think oftentimes gets overlooked is there sometimes needs to be a natural culling of that lowest quality customer because it helps reduce the stress on the business, on the staff, on everything in a way that it gets real returns because now you can focus your energy on the highest. Now, in practice, that's hard you don't really necessarily see that, but it really is true. And I think something that's often overlooked.
Yep. All right. So if we get pricing right and pricing strategy, and strategy is looking at pricing at least on an annual basis, adjusting smaller adjustments more frequently, some communication to clients, however that needs to happen. We get pricing right. Now let's talk about my favorite topic, margins. Gross margins in particular.
Yeah.
Like you use the language margin dilution, and you kind of were talking about growth for the sake of growth.
Yeah.
And we have in one of our customer testimonial stories, there's a case where the sales team was able to more effectively close deals and get orders out the door on the lowest margin product, and the higher margin products were more difficult to get out the door. But the sales team was incentivized on gross revenues.
Yeah.
So they're not looking at profitability. And so they're very good at selling the lowest margin product that the company has. And that went on so long that the gross margins eroded to the point where the company was not profitable. Having this less profitable product was good in the mix, but it needed to be there as a part of, all of the other. And so I'm kind of talking in financial speak, but what is gross margin, and how do you say this to folks in a simple framework or term that makes sense?
Yeah. Gross margin, when I think about that, it's the cost of what's associated with the piece of revenue. And I'll say this more simply of say you have a book. There's a cost for printing that book. There's a cost for shipping the book. That direct cost should be tied directly to $1 of revenue. So when we're looking at margin, we're saying if the book costs $10, or if the book costs $10 or $20 in stores, but the cost to print the book, to ship the book, all that stuff costs, say, $5, you now have a $15 gross margin on that $20 on that $20 product. So when we talk about margins, we talk about increasing margins, we're talking about, say, your book originally started and it cost $5, but now the cost had gone up and it costs now $7. So now instead of your margin being 15, your margin is now 13. And so when we talk about that margin dilution, it's the tendency for it's kind of the interplay of the cost of the thing, whatever you're selling. So whether that's whether that's hours, whether that's a person, a service, or whether that's a product, it's the cost of whatever you're selling is going up in relation to the price. And the mix piece is, I highlighted two things really. One, I find like people get really excited about growth, and rightfully so. But I've seen businesses that, for example, one business we looked at, these are not real numbers, but just for framing reference, they were a $10 million business and they went to a $25 million business and they had the same net profit. And the reason they had the same net profit is because as they chased growth, they accepted lower margins across all of their products. And then they started selling, kind of like you mentioned, more of their low margin product. And so it happened really slowly because, right, if you incentivize off of revenue and off of that growth, then that's what people are going to chase. And it's really easy for this to sneak up on you because it doesn't all happen at once. It happened for them over a period of 2 years. And next thing you look, they're in a cash crunch because you take what we talked about with the cash movement earlier, and now their profits are so compressed that they have a cash crunch and they're having to pre-fund stuff and they can't do it. And then that's only at that point is when they realize that their margins were really off.
And the business is 1.5x larger. So their expenses, whatever their cash outlay needs, have grown significantly, but they have the same amount of working capital available. So there's a double pinch there.
Well, and think about this too, of now their overhead has increased. So they have a higher hurdle they have to clear to make money. Then all of a sudden they experience, say, a 10% or 15% compression, right? And now very quickly, all the profit is gone. And then they're now at a point where they have to make some drastic changes. And so the margin compression not only hurts your profits, but it hurts your stability as a business because it makes you more susceptible to swings, because it makes that error margin significantly thinner. And so that's something that again sneaks up on people really quickly.
And you use the words like erosion and creep because this stuff doesn't just happen overnight. It's a little bit at a time. It's that one sale where we give a little bit on price. It's that one vendor that increases their cost that we don't pass on, that we don't build into our pricing structure, or the vendor that's raising price on us and we don't push back. So it's those costs. The cost of our book goes from 5 to 7 to 9 to 11. But we haven't increased the cost of that book from 20 to 23 to 26. And we also, like, we think if the cost of goods increases by $1 and we then only increase our sales price by $1, that's not maintaining the same margins. So if the cost of goods increases by $1, we need to increase our sales price by $1 something to maintain those margins on a common sized basis, right? On a percent.
And that's one of those that sneaks up on you, like you said too, of like, you can do that, you can get away with that for a time or two, but then next thing you know, you look back 3 years and margins are significantly different than what they are now. And then you got to back into why. And it's like, oh, because you did dollar for dollar, you didn't do common size.
And so these are, kind of in the weeds, small nuanced stuff that are not necessarily intuitive. The price of my book went up $2. I'm going to charge my customers $2 more. I'm fine. But that only keeps me in the place where I've got the same amount of cash. I'm not actually growing my net income as a percentage basis lockstep with revenue. So there's margin erosion, there's overhead creep, these things, it's a little.
I was going to say this kind of goes into that overhead piece, which is like the next one of like, you do dollar for dollar, But what you don't realize as you get bigger, there's other costs that come with getting bigger that
Hmm.
aren't directly related to that margin. And so if you don't keep that ratio right, now you've done dollar for dollar and you're thinking you still have you have $2 extra, but you needed more than that to cover the additional expenses that came from, from that growth. And I think again, that's where with overhead, what I didn't you talk about overhead like in a step up basis, right? Because
Hmm.
it's flat until you got to make a hire or
Yep.
until you need a new software. And so it's one of those things that kind of sneaks up on you
Hmm.
and so you combine that with the margin and you do that $2, do that, and it's good. And then now you got to hire someone else. And now all of a sudden you're underwater and you couldn't figure out how you got there. And
Yep.
that's the complexity of how all these things kind of work together.
And you bundle it all up and you're like, well, today I got $500,000 cash in the bank. So I'm profitable. So yeah, I can hire a couple of people and, we can give a discount on this customer because, we got cash in the bank. Well, then taxes are due and I've just hired 3 people and I go 3 months of payroll and I burn through my cash. And now I have less margin because when I was feeling good, I gave some discounts on pricing and now
Yeah.
I'm in a pickle.
Yeah.
And I, may or may not know somebody who's lived through that,
Definitely not you either, right?
No, no,
It's
no. Would
always
would
someone
never.
else.
Of course, we should double down on some meta ads right now when we got cash in the bank. Let's go.
Yep. Yep. And I would say every ads guy, and again, I love them, but every ads guy thinks if you just ratchet up one more time, it's going to get better, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so that's again, you can justify all of these decisions in a vacuum, but you then combine all of them together, and next thing you know, you're scratching your head, trying to figure it out.
The notion of operational efficiency comes to mind. It's a part of your article too. But I think about what can happen is when there is margin erosion and overhead creep, when things are negatively accretive to the bottom line. We say these things.
Yeah,
Love all this finance speak.
that's right.
When you're making less money and spending more, sometimes that means you need the turnaround team to come in
Hmm.
and analyze, like, why are you spending so much on your meta ads and you haven't optimized or digitized some of these functions, right? Our firm, One Accord, in not too distant history, actually had a 3.5 person accounting team, 3.5 FTEs.
Yeah,
That's a lot of people.
yeah.
Right. And there are things that can and have been automated and streamlined and made more efficient. And that reduction in force saved a lot of money. Right. We became more efficient.
Yeah. I think like where I see this where I've seen this most often is like you have a really good player who's great at what they do and they just make things work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then over a period of time, as you grow and as the business gets bigger, something breaks and now you're scrambling and you're in a bad spot. Right. And that is because we've likely used manual processes. We've not optimized for what that next stage is. And it again it's one of those things that always sneaks up on businesses. They almost never see it coming because they think if something is working today, it's going to always be working in the future. And in some ways, this is like one of the hardest things to address because you don't want to just be actively changing things that you think are working, right? It's kind of counterintuitive. So what we talk to people about is not necessarily that you got to change your process. The two pieces is we just want to document what all the processes are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be as simple as literally just a list, right?
Yep.
People overcomplicate this, make it seem like it's got to be something crazy. But if we have a starting point and we have good people, then we can figure it out even if we don't have a full-on SOP documentation. And then the other thing is just be curious and explore new tools and kind of have in your mind what could the future things look like. So from an accounting perspective, say the first iteration is a spreadsheet. You do all your books on a spreadsheet. The next iteration is a QuickBooks. Then when you get to a certain size, you've got to go to a NetSuite or to a bigger type deal. And it's just being familiar with the landscape so that once you're growing to those points, if you're familiar with that landscape and you're already exploring, you're less likely to get surprised than if you're just kind of saying, nope, this is the way we've done it. This is how we're going to keep doing it. This is how it's always going to be done.
Yeah.
And that's where you really get yourself in a pickle, is because you just don't, you know, don't have any plans. And then that, in accounting world, and I use an accounting example here, but it goes over to, can go into manufacturing and all sorts. But manufacturing, it's like, if you don't plan for that new investment, if you don't plan for that new piece of equipment and it breaks, now
Yep.
you're down and nothing's going out the door.
Well, this
In
is human
accounting, and
condition.
yeah, go ahead. What?
It's human condition. And
Yeah,
I
it
I
is.
frame it
Yeah,
this way, we sell vitamins,
yeah,
but our clients buy painkillers.
yeah,
I mean, it's pervasive across every bit of the human existence, right? We can do things that will promote longevity. We can do things that promote happiness. We can do things that help our relationships. I mean, just physical fitness, like all of the stuff, right? And in business, you can plan and you can document and you can be organized. But when I'm living in the moment, when I'm living in the present, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have a piece of cake after I eat a burger and some fries. And like, let's wash that down with a Coca-Cola because it sounds good, or like I'm in the moment. I'm not thinking about, and it's not that I'm not smart enough to think about it. It's just that I'm not thinking about it. It's not present in my head. So in the business, like the thought of documenting SOPs is like, how does that make me money right now? How does that add
right.
value right now in this moment? And it's like, no, I can, if it breaks, I know how to handle that because I'm used to fixing broken things, because I'm an entrepreneur, because I'm going to just ride that CNC machine until it like gives me that one last unit of output. And then I'll throw some duct tape on it and order a new one. Like I'm a bootstrapper. I'm an
Yeah,
entrepreneur. I've made stuff happen. So one of two things that we've done internally, just exactly how you said it. I've got a spreadsheet where Abby, every time we talk about a vendor, I'm like, are they on our vendor list? Right.
hmm,
And when does the contract renew and what are we paying them for? And we've just kind of gotten into this rhythm. We've been doing this for 60 days, maybe 90 days. And holy smokes, Curtis, there's a lot of rows on that
yeah,
Excel spreadsheet of the vendors, right? And things
yeah,
that I just don't even pay attention to that are on, it's $100 subscription here. It's a $400 subscription here. It's 2 new user licenses for our CRM system here. It's this and that. And you total it up, right?
yeah,
And then the other one is whenever someone does something in the company and it kind of feels like it's the first time, I'm like, I want you to write down what you're doing just in a
yeah,
Word document. Even use voice dictation. I don't care. Just document what you do and send that to Abby, and we formalize it in what is a growing SOP document. I kid you not, it's like 200 pages. But she's put a table of contents in there so we can search and we can go back. Now this is me playing a long game, and I can tie that into like enterprise value and exit strategy and all this stuff down the road. But those are kind of the two easy steps to what you were talking about earlier that I have to be disciplined in, because it gives me zero satisfaction in the moment. It gives me zero return on investment in the moment. It costs me money, doesn't make me money, and I would much rather not do it. But
well, it's building a culture. Like,
yeah.
that's really what it is. And like and I always, so when I was an internal CFO before I started my business, I was entrusted by these business owners to handle their money, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the most sacred thing that there potentially is, right? Because you can do a lot of bad things with that. And my approach with those business owners was, I'm going to be more open than is ever required from you, right? And for my team, I would tell them, I think none of us are above reproach from potentially stealing. We never know what our future looks like, right?
Hmm.
So we've got to have the systems in place to make sure that if we're handling money, it's never one person touching it, right?
Hmm.
There's always some sort of check and balance with that. And that's one of those like key, accounting principles is, we got to have those separation of duties.
Mm-hmm.
But we did that and created that culture by talking about it and by being very intentional that everyone had the right to call that out. And I think this operational deal, it's so easy for people to want to build their little kingdom and create their little silos. And if you as the owner allowed that, that is where all those inefficiencies build up,
Hmm.
because now they're the only one with that knowledge. And so if we create an atmosphere of if we create an atmosphere of openness, of this planning atmosphere, and then we tell the people that are the experts, we want you to teach and make sure other people know, you can get to a better spot to where you have less of those issues down the line. And it's something I really care about, because I think, again, I've seen it where you don't do it, and then you have something happen where people come in, and now all of a sudden you have to divert everyone's attention for this period of time to fix these things that are wrong, but they were all fixable. And you think it's this one-time thing, but what happens is it happens one time, and
Yeah.
then 2 months later it happens another
The
time,
culture
then it
you're
happens
talking about.
another time, and you're running from crisis to crisis.
Yep.
And I've seen that live, and it's not a pleasant environment to be in. And what you do is you create a whole organization that is now scared of what's about to happen, and it raises the stress level of everyone, which means that now when your stress levels raised, you're not as good at your job, and you're likely waiting for the next thing, which means that you're never proactive, and you're going to be the reactive company that is going to be behind the eight ball in your industry, right? You're
Yep.
never going to be an industry leader in that.
And you said it just a moment ago, that becomes the culture. That's the way we do things around here, is we just wait for the next shoe to drop, and then we put out that fire, and then we just put out fires, and we put out fires. And this kind of connects into, I think, the last point in the article that you wrote, which is kind of chasing, I think of it as shiny object syndrome,
Yep, exactly.
chasing new ideas, right? And here again, that can become cultural. That can become the way we do things around here. I've got 30 people on the team, and these are really smart people. And so that's like, let's say minimum 3 new ideas out of each person per year. That's 100 new ideas that are legitimately great ideas. There's probably 30 others per person that are not the best ideas, and I probably lead that list. So that's a lot of ideas. But let's just say that for every one person on my team of 30, there is a really good idea that is worthy of implementation. That's one every other week. It's impossible. So then I look back, like I'm starting to now look in the rear view for the current year. And I'm looking back at, let's say, the first 9 months, and like, okay, well, what are the initiatives that we prioritized, and did we get those things done? And by and large, we did. What are all the other things that we got done that were not on the priority list, that were done kind of ad hoc, that were done because, it was a good idea at the time? So then all of these things that we've implemented. And then here's the one that hurts. How many things did we build that we never used? How many things did we test? So I'm struggling with this, Kurtis. Like, I'm literally in a space where I don't have clarity on the messaging to the team. On one hand, it's like, okay, we got no new shiny objects in the next calendar year. Like, we've got enough. We just need to get excellent at the things that we've done. Well, that stifles innovation, because then people don't feel like they can bring ideas forward. On the other hand, encouraging, hey, great ideas, like, keep them coming. Well, then we don't actually like get into the real rhythm of any of these, because just as soon as we launch something else. The market is confused because we're always testing new things, and I don't know what to do right now.
Well, I would say we dealt with this exact same thing too, of I wanted us to be learning AI deeply, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I said, we're going to do a weekly meeting. It's going to be 30 minutes. We're just going to pop in as a team. Everyone is going to share something that they've tried or done in the last week with AI. And the idea is I wanted to get all these people to be testing, new things, trying new things. I wanted it also not to become siloed in that only one person knew. I wanted it to then be shared. And so I wanted to build that culture of, this is what we're doing. And we did this for 4 months, 5 months, maybe is a little bit less, but I looked at it, and we got to, I was like seeing, what have we done out of this? And what I found is we were all chasing just weird little things and had finished almost none of them, right? Because I was trying to do the right thing and kind of building that curiosity to like push us forward, but we didn't have enough structure around it. So what we actually did, and this is still to be seen, but we've made sure that we have our annual and quarterly priorities. We still have like a channel in Slack where we're sharing the things that we're learning and moving forward. But then we've set an every other week meeting with the team where each group is supposed to report out on the project that they're working on, that's the quarterly priority. And so with that structure, we have our annual priorities, but each quarter we have the ability to introduce new ones that are kind of on top of the annual. And so it's providing a space that new ideas can get introduced and shared, but then we're measuring those against what we've already identified. And if it's better than what we've identified, we're kicking that one to the curb, right?
Yeah.
But it's a team decision. Then there's accountability and reporting back. Now, we've only been doing this for about a month and a half, and we've had great discussions, and it's been great to this point. But I think that's what happens is you have a business owner that just does it a certain way, and it's made them successful. But now all of a sudden you have a full team that can all do that same thing. And you want to encourage that mentality because it's encouraging that entrepreneur mentality, that ownership mentality. But then if you let it run too rampant, then you either get nothing or you get a bunch of broken things like you mentioned, like where you've done all these things and they've turned into nothing. And you just end up with just chaos. And that stops you from actually doing the most important things in the business, because everyone is distracted with their own thing.
Yeah. If we have an initiative and we launch it and it doesn't have immediate success, then we take on a new initiative and we haven't given that previous one, it's fair shake. I mean, particularly AI in this current era, what is true today may be may look different 30 days from now, 60 days from now. Right. And
it surely will. Yeah, it definitely will.
Keep up on that. I really like the idea of having like the AI task force. I have moved in today. This is very timely, as in like today, I live squarely in the AI cynic space. I went from curious to skeptical, now cynical.
Okay.
There was a McKinsey study that, I saw a headline somewhere that said 95% of companies surveyed will say that there's no return on their AI investment to date, as of yet. And I've been really careful to observe that this is still the bleeding edge of evolution. I've also used the language that AI so far for me has been a big nothing burger. Like there's nothing there between them. Where's the beef, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That isn't to say that I don't use Gemini and ChatGPT and, the large language model assist in a lot of ways, but in terms of revolutionizing the business or the practice, right? I'm not seeing it come out. So having a task force like you just described, or some kind of organization where there's some idea sharing and, some collection for observation, I might actually implement that. That's good.
Yeah, I'll say it's not solely focused on AI right now, but it's obviously we're utilizing AI in that. But I think that is what is important, is that there's focus to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what most people miss is they think that we can just put in effort and we're going to get a return, but that effort has got to be focused at the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. And when you focus that effort, that is where you can start to see that. And I think, for example, the main thing when we do our CFO work, the main core rhythm that we have is the meeting that we do monthly to review the financials. We do other things and we have that, but that's consistent across everyone. And in all this exploration, we'd ended up with a bunch of bits and pieces, but we never sat down and said, we're going to actually document the mentality that we want our CFOs to have with this, right? And we'd done a million different things and we had a great process, but it's like we didn't simplify it to the most simple parts that we could. And all it took was really 2 weeks, I guess you could say 4 weeks, because it was 2 meetings of 3 of the people focusing on that. And it took stuff that had been bugging us for months that we were supposed to be solving in this less focused AI kind of workshop. And we were able to solve it with that focused effort. So I think that's something that is the leader's job, is to make sure that there's the right focused effort going, and that there's not a bunch of, people say squirrel, going out over here, like just not chasing the squirrels, and making sure that the effort is focused and that there's accountability to that focused effort.
Do you use a framework like EOS, or you're working with?
Yeah, we don't use, so I've explored all of them. I've explored EOS, I've explored scaling up. We've kind of taken bits and pieces from a lot of different ones. I'd say we're probably most similar to EOS at this point. There's one that I'm blanking on the name of it. Ryan Deese or Dice is his name, and he has a framework. I think the scalable framework, and that's a framework that we started leaning more into.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like what I like about that framework is they treat it as like a pyramid where you've got the different levels of systems and things, and you kind of implement those things. And then that kind of rolls up into kind of your strategy for meetings and for all of the, documentation and everything. And so we've leaned on that, but it's very similar to an EOS type framework.
I think like that old book written a while ago says there's nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true for business operating systems, right? Like,
Yeah.
Gino Wickman got it from Vern Harnish, who got it from someone else and came from somewhere else.
It's all repackaged. It's just repackaging it.
Yeah. I like to jokingly inverse the other line. It's old wine in new wineskins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
what these systems allow for are discipline around not chasing after squirrels and shiny objects.
Yeah.
Those one-off that we tell ourselves are a one-time non-recurring expense. But when you do that 3 times a month or twice a quarter, that individual expense may have been one-time non-recurring, but the behavior is recurring. And that's when profits disappear. So we've talked, we talk from the top line, from revenue pricing controls into gross margins. Then we talk about overhead. Then we talk about inefficiencies. And then we talk about kind of these below the line one-time expenses that stack up and become a recurring behavior set. And all of those combined, you can scale your business. You can go from 10 million to 25 million and not add $1 to net income because it all either eroded or was compressed or crept away from you, however you want to say it. It doesn't happen overnight though.
And what I would say to people is, like, going back to the start where we talked about it, being intimidated by it, is I say, and I just made this up. So here's Kurtis's lexicon, like made up stats, right? Is I think if you spend 1 hour a month looking at your financials, you're going to be in the top 1% of businesses. I don't think most people are doing that. And what I mean by 1 hour is, print off those reports, get all the support, and just look at it and ask questions. And as you ask questions and dig into the details here, the details here, you, over a course of a year, if you document all of those decisions that you made, I guarantee you that if you summed up the total of that, you have created a whole new business. And if you do that consistently, you stop the creep that happens with a lot of this stuff.
Wow.
And you create a business that is the most profitable and most cash rich business you could potentially create. And if you do that, being the leader in your industry is just, frankly, ultimately, basically inevitable, right? Because so few are doing it in that focused of a way. And if you don't have, everyone has an hour, right? That's what I should say. Like, everyone has an hour. And I think you could probably count on a single hand how many people in your industry are spending that long sitting with those results every single month.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. And I think to myself, man, an hour is actually a long time.
It is.
In financial statements. And so then my thought is, how much more powerful would that hour be, or elucidating, right? Bring into the light if let's say you were interviewing me about my financial statement, right? Because if I look at them, they're familiar and I know. So I'm already like answering questions in my own head. But if you're like, hey, so what's this expense? And I'm like, oh, that was for Bob for the thing. Who's Bob? Well, Bob's the guy that does stuff for us. Yeah. What kind of stuff? Is there a Joe? Have you ever shopped Bob against Joe? Is this necessary? Can Bob be a bot? Right? You can ask questions that I don't know to ask of myself, or I wouldn't ask of myself, because I'd be then challenging myself. And like, that doesn't feel good. Sounds nice.
Yeah. Just ask why over and over again. It's the 5 whys, if you ever heard of that.
Oh yeah.
This is a vivid memory in my mind. I was in my first CFO gig. I was really not at that point even a CFO, because the business was smaller and they were growing. we tripled within 3 years. And so it was like a massive, I mean, it was a massive growing point for me. First time sitting with the financials with the CEO. And I said, here's the result. Our gross margins are this. They changed from this to this between the 2 months. And he goes, well, why did it change? Like, what changed? And I paused, and then I got really nervous because I'm like, I didn't even look at to why it changed. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was in, and so it's like, even if you have the knowledge,
Yeah.
I had all the knowledge, I had the ability to do that, but I didn't take the time and pause and ask that why.
Yeah.
And I think if you get yourself in that practice with the financials, you'll see a drastic change. And that's what we help people do, is like, just sit and think about it. Right. And we create that, by meeting by having our regular meetings, we're forcing that conversation in a way that the business owner often can't get themselves to do on their own. So
yeah, I don't want to do it on my own. I get financial statements delivered to me monthly. P&L, balance sheet, and statement of cash flows. And there's one or two others. Like, I also look at a vendor list and I sort top to bottom, who are we paying the most. And so those are some of and that's actually the one that I look at the most with the most curiosity. Like, who do we pay the most this month and what do we get for it? Right. That's where my mind is. I glance at the P&L. I've got some intuition around what it is. We talk about deals a lot. So I've got a good sense of where we'll end up, but I'm not looking so much into the details on the expense side, like the SG&A. And I'm sure there are efficiencies that are there.
Yeah.
I do look at, and we follow, similar to EOS, we actually use the same framework that we coach and advise clients through, and we use a software IO, and that it's our platform that we've identified in our KPIs. Long way to get there. And one of our KPIs is actually gross margin. And, we track that, and it's visible to everyone in the company. So I show everybody in the company every 2 weeks where our revenue is and what our gross margin is, what our revenue concentrations are, and our forecast for how much of our revenue we anticipate will last more than 12 months. And so I label that recurring revenue. If we think that monthly revenue will last more than 12 months, then, that's fair. Those are some of the data that we look at kind of globally and share with the team. So, everybody knows what our margin targets are, what our revenue numbers are, where our concentration targets are, and how we're doing on that. I don't go so far as to, share bottom line information or expense, because we're privately held. There's just two owners in the company. But on the top line and the things that the folks on the team can affect, we communicate that pretty regularly.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think, like, you say you don't go into expenses detail. People get overwhelmed by that because they think, I can't look at all this stuff, right? But and they can't, and they don't want to. And there's a lot of times not a reason to. But if you actually look at your financial statements, there's generally 3 to 5 things that you should be looking at on a regular basis, right? And if you hit and I say, okay, we're literally going to something, an elementary school kid can understand. Tell me what the biggest numbers are, right?
Yeah.
And then tell me what the biggest numbers are. Then once a month, pick one of those numbers and just get some reporting, go a little bit deeper on that number. And if you do that consistently over a course of a year, you're going to have looked at the most important numbers 1 to 2 times. And again, that puts you in the elite category of someone who's managing their numbers like that.
So good. Such good advice. Well, I look forward to picking up this conversation next time we get together and
Absolutely.
see where it goes.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks for having time to chat. It's fun.
You bet, man. Thanks for hanging out on the Value Factory. Okay. Until next time, thanks for being with us.